Hey guys, welcome to this week's FAQ and Freebie Friday. Now for those of you new to the channel and just joining us, these videos are all about answering your health-related questions. So if you have a question concerning your health, something in regards to nutrition, Chinese medicine, herbalism, or anything under the umbrella of health and wellness, and you feel we could help you answer that question, all you have to do is leave your question in the comment section below, and we'll be selecting those based on popularity, the questions we feel will be most beneficial to the whole community, and also the questions that we are capable of answering. Now, something else really great about these videos is that every week from the comment section, we select one person at random to win a free bag of tonic herbs or medicinal mushrooms. So even if you don't have a question for us this week, but you're interested in winning some free herbs, all you have to do to be entered to win is subscribe to the YouTube channel. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and just drop a comment in the comment section below. And with all that being said, let's get into this week's questions. Okay, so diving right into our first question. This one reads, if someone were to suspect they have a heated liver, what type of diet should they use to correct it according to TCM? Now, for those of you unfamiliar with TCM or traditional Chinese medicine, a heated liver, also known as liver heat or liver fire, generally refers to the stress or the burden of the liver. Now you see, if you look at the major symptoms of a heated liver, you have things like headaches, migraines, insomnia, constipation, feeling flushed or having like a reddish complexion, which actually would indicate more so poor circulation than good circulation, which we'll dive into. High blood pressure, general irritability, frustration, etc. A lot of these are the same symptoms of excess stress hormones, especially things like serotonin and nitric oxide. And the general poor ability to detoxify or to destroy these excess chemicals, which leads to these conditions becoming chronic. Now, something else very interesting here is that there's a very strong correlation between the excess production of these stress chemicals and inflammation. And ultimately, a lot of the symptoms associated with heated liver or liver fire, hence the term fire, have a lot to do with inflammation. So ultimately, the pathology of this condition has everything to do with tracing back to the liver becoming burdened by stress. And now typically, according to TCM, this liver heat or liver fire actually is not as much provoked by diet as much as it is the negative emotions. So really the major culprit here is chronic negative emotions and usually suppressing the particular emotions, anger, frustration, and resentment. When you have these sorts of emotions built up in you, keep in mind that the liver is the seat of emotion. And that's because the liver has to synthesize, metabolize, or destroy all of the hormones that are associated with emotions. So this is something that science is coming to figure out, that all of your emotions, it's called emotion because it's an energy in motion in the body. So it's meant to flow and to move. And all of your emotions have a hormonal component to them. So when you feel anger, frustration, resentment, these emotions, they have a hormonal component, and it's usually the expression of the stress chemicals I just mentioned. It's usually the expression of things like adrenaline and norepinephrine. These are adrenal stress hormones that really ramp you up. However, the problem with these sorts of stress hormones is that they have catastrophic effects. They'll give you a sense of energy, but it's almost a false sense of energy that has, again, negative consequences afterwards. So if you've ever been angry, you'll notice you'll get a lot of energy, but it's a very temporary, short burst of energy that, again, it's doing more damage usually than good. That's why, you secrete these hormones usually only in life-threatening sort of situations. Now, if you're the type of person, though, the personality trait of somebody with liver heat, according to TCM, is, again, somebody that's generally chronically angry, irritable, and frustrated. Now, why does this become chronic? Why would these emotions become chronic, meaning that they're persistent or prolonged? Well, that's because they haven't been expressed. You see, whenever you have an emotion and you don't express it, you're countering yourself. You get angry and you say, no, I don't want to feel that emotion, so you block it. So it persists. There's that saying, whatever you resist persists. So if you have an angry emotion, if you have a resentment and you withhold it and you suppress it, put it down inside of you, the problem here is that your body is still experiencing that negative emotion, but now it's become chronic. And that can greatly burden the liver and cause that liver heat. And it's not surprising that a lot of the symptoms associated with liver heat and liver fire are symptoms of sort of suppression, constipation. It's holding back, holding in. You can't let your shit out, right? So something like constipation is sort of, in my perspective, a psychosomatic of the suppressed emotions usually that are associated with anger or associated with the liver heat or the liver fire. So if you're familiar with TCM, you know that every disease, part of the pathology is usually an emotional component. So this is usually the emotion involved in liver heat. So as much as you're looking for dietary protocols, I would highly recommend taking a look at the emotional aspect of potential liver fire or liver heat. Find out what anger, resentments, frustrations you're holding on to and just let them out. This could just be you acknowledging them for yourself, telling the person, writing a letter, and just burning it or something. But whatever you have to do to acknowledge those things and stop repressing those emotions is going to be incredibly helpful for removing a major causative factor of emotional stress or hormonal stress that's burdening the liver. Nothing burdens your liver as much as a chronic emotional stress. Yes, alcohol will attribute to it, poor diet. And when I say poor diet, I'm referring to things that are generally difficult to digest and metabolize, because your liver plays a key role in the metabolism, digestion. If you're giving your body foods that are difficult to digest, that can stress the liver and lead to these things. A variety of different chemicals, xenoestrogens, phytoestrogens, a lot of the common unhealthy chemicals and toxins in our environment that we hear about all the time, those can obviously burden the liver. But again, I think truly it's the emotional stressors that attribute most to this particular condition. Now, things that I would recommend doing about it, other than addressing the emotional side, is taking the primary liver tonics that would assist your liver with detoxification. So those are herbs like dandelion and milk thistle, as well as schizandra, Chinese bitters. Those will all be helpful in assisting the liver in detoxifying the excess stress chemicals and destroying things like serotonin that attribute to a lot of these symptoms as well. Now, according to TCM, some of the best foods for treating liver heat conditions are your bitter foods. So any of the leafy greens, asparagus, the cruciferous vegetables, granted that they're really well cooked. You want to cook those really well, otherwise they will suppress the thyroid. They're goitrogenic in that way. But as long as they're well cooked, those can be beneficial. Also, consuming citrus. Citrus is incredibly helpful, especially the sweeter citrus. So you can get not just the bitter components that help to stimulate the production of bile and cleanse the liver, but also fructose is incredibly important for liver health and detoxification, because the liver needs glycogen in order to detoxify, and fructose replenishes liver glycogen 500% more effectively than any form of other sugar. So fruit, particularly citrus fruits, are going to be really beneficial for the liver. In addition to that, consume grass-fed liver. And again, just sticking to an easier to digest diet in general is going to be very beneficial. Avoiding the consumption of difficult to digest grains, any polyunsaturated fats which disrupt proper metabolism, they impair cellular respiration, and then probably just, again, sticking to, the basic easy to digest foods. Well-cooked animal meats and proteins, anti-inflammatory proteins, shellfish, eggs, raw dairy if you can get it, really ripe organic fruit, and then well-cooked vegetables, and avoiding, again, mostly the starchy grains and carbohydrates. All right, so getting into our next question. This one reads, wondering how dried herbs made into a powder like yours differ from ones made into an herbal tincture, usually with an alcohol extraction method. Is one method more beneficial or potent than the other? Thank you. Okay, so first and foremost, our herbs are actually not a ground powdered herb. There's a difference between taking a whole herb, drying out, and turning it into a powder. That's still considered the whole herb or the whole leaf, which has an unknown amount of the active constituents. Our herbs are actually a powdered extract. So the method in which our herbs are prepared, basically we take the herb and we make a decoction, like let's say like a really, really strong tea. That's one way of extracting the medicinal components next to alcohol. Once you have that really, really potent, extracted, concentrated liquid, that is dried and the water is evaporated out of it, leaving only the medicinal constituents behind. So our herbs are actually a powdered, extracted concentrate, making them usually just as powerful or potent as alcoholic extractions or strong liquid decoctions or extractions, just with the ease or the convenience of having a powder and being able to easily mix that into hot water. If you've ever used our herbs, you'll notice that they dissolve like into this almost like a sticky resin, and then it completely dissolves into the water really easily. So that's just for the sake of use, convenience. This makes it really easy to use these herbs in a variety of different things, everything from hot beverages to cold beverages, and even adding them into chocolates and baked goods. But they are nevertheless still extracted, and they're concentrated. They're mostly a 20-to-1 extract. So the difference between a whole powdered herb and an alcoholic extraction or a powdered extraction is that in the extractions, you're getting something usually referred to as a standardized extract, which has a known amount of the active constituent in it. So you can say, you know, in a half a teaspoon, there's 300 milligrams of this active constituent. Where you take a teaspoon of the whole powdered herb, you're going to have a concentrated form of that active constituent and sort of a more or less unknown amount of it. Now, there's benefits to each side. Obviously, having the whole herb, you're guaranteeing freshness usually, depending on where you get the herb from, of course. Like, let's say if you picked it from the wild and dried it yourself, that's going to be a fresh herb. You can also make strong teas of it, or you can make large batches of your own decoctions with it or extractions with it. So that's, you know, the benefit there. You're also getting, again, sort of a variable number of the amount of the active constituent, where the benefit to having your extracted forms, there's different constituents that are pulled out depending on whether you use alcohol or water. So alcohol usually pulls out a certain amount or a certain type of active constituent. I think it's usually the triterpenoids, whereas the water extractions pull out the polysaccharides. That could be the other way around. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's the benefit to those. So again, we're not a whole herb powder, we are an extracted powder. So generally speaking though, to answer your question, extractions are more potent. That's usually the major upside to extractions. Major plus side to our form of the herb is you can use it either way. Where if you have an alcoholic extraction, it might be incredibly potent, but you're not really going to want to add an alcohol extraction to, let's say, your coffee or to a juice or to a smoothie, because the alcohol will throw off the flavor and the taste profile. So in my opinion, and again, this isn't just because I'm biased to our product, this is long before VitaJing, I always preferred these forms of the herbs because of their potency and because of their versatility. All right, so that brings us to our third question. This one reads, where's the best source, what country, for herbs and mushrooms to avoid heavy metal toxicity? I've heard China has a lot of pollutants, including lead, which is left in the herbs. So the first thing I just want to say is that China, as toxic as it is, our herbs are from facilities that are highly controlled and certified organic. So yes, China's toxic, but so is the whole world to a certain degree. You know, the only places left on the planet that are probably not so toxic are places that are probably not inhabited by humans. So, you know, there's always going to be some trace of toxicity. Life in of itself is going to come with toxicity, you know, so life is not about avoiding harm and toxins altogether. It's about a balance. It's about a risk to reward ratio. And even when you look at, not to go off on a tangent, when you look at the consumption of food, even when you consume food, there's metabolic byproducts or waste or toxins. So even the process of metabolism shows you this fact or truth about life, which is that everything comes with some sort of harm. Every good has some bad to it, and all bad has some good to it. This is just an inevitable fact about life. So obviously what we want to do is balance, you know, the risk to reward ratio here. We want to make sure that the herbs you're consuming have more beneficial constituents than they do harmful ones. But the fact of the matter is, you know, look at a wild animal. They eat stuff that's covered in pathogens and bacteria all the time. But that food is giving them enough life to metabolize and detoxify any toxins or pathogens that have come with it. And this same goes for our herbs, at least. Yes, China is a toxic place, America is a toxic place, but there are exceptions to the rule. There are facilities that are very controlled, use organic practices, and they just ensure that there's tons of regulations. Just so you know, I'm not the major guy when it comes to sourcing, but from what I do know, I've spent some time working for a sourcing company in France, and what I do know is that put it like this. It would be very difficult for you to get a product on the shelf that was going to kill you. There's an incredible amount of rules and regulations that somebody has to go through just to make sure that that supplement and that substance is not going to kill somebody, because obviously that company could be in tons of trouble. It could be sued, etc. So although there's probably higher quality herbs compared to others, it's going to be very difficult that you're going to run into an entirely toxic substance or an herb. We test all of our herbs, third-party testing for heavy metals, etc. But you do just have to understand that, if I'm being entirely honest, 99% of supplements come with some sort of impurity, because consider the processing that goes into larger manufacturing. So if you're totally concerned, I would just recommend growing your own herbs and doing all the processing yourself if you're trying to have the highest quality and purity of herbs. But if you're concerned about our herbs, we do third-party testing. They're free of any dangerous levels of heavy metals or any toxins. They're grown in organic facilities. Most of the herbs are certified organic. They're tested for all of these things. Something else that could be helpful for you to understand is that the coffee, for example, coffee actually detoxifies all the heavy metals. So that's one of the many reasons I always use coffee when using the herbs, is that the coffee actually will detoxify and get rid of any of the toxic substances in anything that you're consuming, whether that's herbs or whether that's your water even. So if you're really concerned about it, you can just add these herbs to coffee. You can add the herbs to the brew as you're brewing coffee, let's say in a French press, and then strain that out, and you can probably from that point ensure that there's no heavy metals in it whatsoever. But again, our herbs, no traces of heavy metals. They're tested for heavy metals. I don't know of any other countries that manufacture herbs larger scale that are more or less toxic than others. Yes, China's a toxic place, but again, find out the sources. A lot of the really questionable herbs that come from China, these are the herbs that you find on Amazon, and they're questionable packaging, questionable companies. So they're not really putting in much effort into disclosing this information. But again, you can rest assured that that's not going to be an issue for a lot of the major companies that I'm aware of that are sold over here in the States. All right, so I'm going to answer one and final question for today. And that question is, what's your take on 5-HTP in general? Okay, so for those of you that do not know, 5-HTP, also known as 5-hydroxytryptophan or oxytryptin, is an amino acid that is a precursor to the biosynthesis of tryptophan. Now, tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin. So the major reason people take 5-HTP is to increase their serotonin levels. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation around serotonin and what it does actually in the body. I don't want to dive too deep into this and start to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I do think that there's a lot of fraudulent claims around what serotonin does to kind of promote the sales of not just 5-HTP, but serotonin as well as melatonin, which is a huge industry, and a lot of the whole sleep insomnia industry. This is a massive market. But the fact of the matter is, if you study physiology, it's clear as day what serotonin does in the body, and it's not anything that it's usually claimed to do. Serotonin, just to put it to perspective, is most chronically elevated under the stress of darkness and under hibernation. Now, when an animal goes into hibernation, you have to consider that's a major stress. That's something that people overlook, is that during hibernation, you're starving. You're surviving off of the process of gluconeogenesis during hibernation. So when a bear is in hibernation, it's surviving off of its own fat reserves and muscle reserves. So that's done through, again, this process called gluconeogenesis, where you're basically eating up your tissues and your fats to convert it into glucose. So ultimately, this is going to lead to diabetes. That's what diabetes is, in a sense, is the chronic elevation of free circulating fatty acids or liberated fatty acids, which is the byproduct of chronic gluconeogenesis, or breaking down your fat and protein to turn it into glucose to survive. So what's interesting here is that serotonin is always elevated during these sorts of stress, during famine, during starvation, during fasting, during hibernation. So anytime that there's stress, serotonin is involved. So serotonin is a stress chemical and a stress mediator. And in fact, serotonin, and to a certain degree because of its inflammatory nature. It's an inflammatory mediator, and it suppresses your metabolism. That's how it assists with hibernation. That's how it's helpful. The basic thing serotonin does and why it's present during hibernation, during stress, during long periods of darkness, etc., is because serotonin down regulates your metabolism, so it turns down your thyroid and your metabolism, so that way you can preserve your energy and you can last and live off of little for longer. So it's a helpful survival mechanism, but it comes with catastrophic negative side effects, as we can see. So it's going to lead to the catabolism of the tissues, the fats, the liberation of fatty acids, and basically chemical stress or metabolic stress. Now, the other thing that serotonin does that's negative in the biology is that it kind of opposes the whole dopamine system. Serotonin is part of what I would call to be the sickness field. So it's part of it's usually associated or stimulated or stimulates the production of all the stress chemicals. So all those stress chemicals, they generally oppose the whole dopamine system. Those two things are sort of opposites here. So from what I understand, depression has little to do with serotonin. So that's one of the major reasons people are taking it. They've been told that they have a chemical imbalance, they have low serotonin, that's why they're depressed. So the pathology of depression, at least in the biology, has nothing to do with the deficiency of serotonin as much as it probably does an excess of it, which opposes dopamine. So if you're dealing with things like insomnia or depression, what you're going to want to do is probably bring down the serotonin and the associated stress chemicals, and you're going to want to focus on bringing the dopamine up. So doing things to increase dopamine would be very beneficial. Again, serotonin is going to slow the metabolism, slow your thyroid, and that, if anything, would attribute to depression. So this is a very counterproductive supplement. So I would advocate against it, and anything that's going to increase the production of serotonin, I would focus on increasing your dopamine. And if you're taking it for depression, definitely watch the videos I made on emotional stress and healing. And my basic tip though is that depress, if you look at the word depression, D means down. So literally a depressed person is somebody who's been pressing themselves down. The basic cure for depression psychologically, where it usually starts, is to express. X, like exit, means out. So press out. So that's the basic cure, I think, for depression. If you're depressed, you need to express. So normally depressed people are just people that have been pressed down. They're pressing down their thoughts, their emotions. They're pressing down what it is that they truly feel. They're not saying what they want to say, doing what they want to do. So ultimately, in my experience as a cognitive therapist, and I'm putting this in incredibly simple terms or layman's terms, just express yourself. But focus on this from both ends though. Focus on it from, the more psychological standpoint. Start expressing yourself. Say what you want to say, do what you want to do, think what you want to think. But then you can also focus on the biology. Focus on things that are going to actually decrease serotonin, and anything that's going to slow your metabolic rate, decrease your thyroid functions, going to make you feel less energetic, and that could make you feel physiologically or biologically depressed or lethargic. So the fact of the matter that serotonin suppresses your metabolic rate, meaning that you're going to produce less energy, just goes to show you that it can't necessarily be that great for increasing your energy and making you feel happier and less depressed. I would focus on things that boost the biochemistry of the whole dopamine system. So you want to bring up the dopamine, if anything. So watch the videos I've made on how to do that, and anything else that you can find on increasing dopamine. Alright, so that brings this week's FAQ and Freebie Friday to a close. If you guys enjoyed it and found it helpful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the YouTube channel for future videos. And if you're interested in winning some free tonic herbs or medicinal mushrooms, be sure to leave a comment or question in the comment section below. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.